Hey guys, welcome to this video where we're going to be checking out this CraftBot Plus Pro 3D printer. Now this printer came to me courtesy of digitmakers.ca. I would highly encourage you guys to go check out their website. They are an official distributor of CraftBot products, but they also handle all the products you need for your 3D printing experience, everything from accessories to filament to upgrade parts, etc. Now they lent me this printer on a 3-month trial basis so that I could check out this machine, put it through its paces, and let you guys know what I think of it. And so before we get started with setting up the machine and starting to print things, we can take a quick look at the CraftBot website and check out the specs on this printer and see what it's capable of. And so on the CraftBot website, we can take a look at some of the highlighted features. So it is a plug and play device, which would indicate that it should be easy to use. Print, pause, and resume. The resume feature is also very nice in case you have an interrupted print from something like a power failure. Color LCD touchscreen is a very nice little addition. Has an all-metal steel frame, so this thing is nicknamed the Tank. We'll see if it lives up to that name. Heated and removable build plate, so it should get hot enough to print with materials like ABS, so it should hit over 100 degrees Celsius. All-metal hot end, which does say it goes up to 300 degrees Celsius, so you should be able to print in more exotic materials. The layer resolution goes down to 50 microns with a 0.25 millimeter nozzle, so standard it comes with 0.4 millimeter nozzle. Now we'll see a little bit later if the actual dimensional accuracy of the prints holds up as well. Now of course the dimensional accuracy is different than the layer resolution height, so we'll take a look at that. Best warranty, so 5-year warranty, which should indicate that they are very confident in this printer. You can add things like a filament monitoring system, lockable plexiglass door, and a dome cover. So I have the door and the dome cover for this review, so we will check out the benefits of those later on. Scrolling down, we can see one other important additional feature here, which is of course the build volume. So 250 by 200 by 200 millimeters tall. And for those of you working in inches, that is 10 by 8 by 8. So a reasonable build size. Now this is just a general overview of this printer. So let's get into more specifics right now. And so the first thing I'm going to do here is unbox the CraftBot Plus Pro. And it is very thoughtfully packaged. There are the instructions located on the top, along with a quality control check, which is great to see. And then inside of that, we have all of the accessories packaged with the filament. Once you get that out of the box, you can lift the CraftBot Plus Pro out and be very careful because it's quite heavy. With the printer now up on the table, we can take a closer look at it. And an early version of this printer first appeared in 2014 through a crowd-funded project through CraftBot, and ever since then this printer has been evolving as CraftBot has revised it, upgraded and updated it, and so really they've definitely refined this printer by now, and it has been come to known as the Tank. And so this printer comes with everything you need to get started, including a full roll of PLA along with some other PLA samples, power cords, Allen keys, spool mounts, USB cables, and even a little USB thumb drive. So really it is a complete kit. And so what we're going to do now is we're going to just do the small amount of assembly that is required. There are 2 socket head cap screws at the back of the printer that we can remove with the included hex key. And then we are going to install the filament guide and the spool holder. Then we can slip in the filament guide tube at the back and the front on the print head. Plug in our power cable. Now I also have the dome and the door, and these are optional parts from CraftBot that I would highly recommend you investing in, especially if you foresee yourself printing in ABS. Now the dome comes with a fan, which has a filter on the back to reduce the amount of fumes that you smell coming off of the printer, especially again if you print in ABS. And the door has a lock on it, which is especially useful in an educational environment to keep curious little hands away from the hot parts. To install the dome on the top of the printer, you only have to remove a few of the socket head cap screws. I unnecessarily removed them all because I didn't look at the dome first. Some of the holes on the top of the dome have clearance for the heads, while others do not. So you only have to remove the socket head cap screws, which do not have clearance for the heads. Then you can of course tighten them back down and the dome is secured. On the back of the printer, you can plug the fan into this receptacle here, and that completes the dome installation. On the front of the printer, the door simply installs onto the sheet metal opening, so the hinges slip over the edge of the sheet metal and you can use your hex screw to tighten down 4 grub screws. Just make sure the door closes without any interference and it's centered within the opening. And of course you can test out the lock to make sure it grabs the other edge of the sheet metal, and you're done with the door installation. Then you can power on the printer and start getting yourself familiar with all the settings on the really nice and responsive color touchscreen. Now in the settings you'll find things like options to turn the interior lights on and off, the fan in the dome on and off, Wi-Fi settings, firmware versions, and all that sort of thing. But really what I'm going to start with here is getting started with the bed leveling. So right now I'm playing around with some of the presets for the materials, but you'll see in a second here that I'm going to cycle back to the bed leveling procedure inside of the settings. And so what's really nice here is that it walks you through the process and it takes you through the 3 different bed leveling points, and you can adjust the bed level with the 3 adjuster knobs at the bottom. And like I said, the interface takes you through this process and it'll take you through twice, so you can double check that you have the correct bed leveling set before you get started printing. And so the next thing I'm going to do here is load up some filament, and I'm starting with PETG filament because I thought that PLA would be too easy for a printer of this caliber. I figured we'd start with something that would be a little bit more challenging. Now PETG is still relatively easy to print, but it does present some challenges, and we'll get to that a little bit later. And so here I've just purged the nozzle, and now I'm going to hop online here to download the Craftware slicing software, which is CraftBot's own in-house slicing software. Now you can use a third-party slicer. The printer accepts G-code files, so as long as you set up the profile in your own slicer appropriately, it should work with the CraftBot Plus Pro. And the Craftware slicer is actually a really good program, so I would encourage you to at least download it and try it out. And you can see here that I'm just setting up a very simple part to start. So I have these little tiny brackets that I want to print in PETG. And so I'm just getting it set up on the print bed. I'm multiplying them, and then I'm going through some of the settings to make sure that all of the settings are appropriate before I start actually producing G-code files. And so I wanted to make sure that I do have the printer set as the CraftBot Plus Pro. And you can sort of just experiment within the slicer itself. There's lots of different settings to go through. But similar to many other slicer softwares out there, there is a beginner and advanced mode. So in the beginner mode, you can see there's only a few options to play with, such as your material settings, your print quality settings, and that sort of thing. And I like to play around in the more advanced settings, and so I'm going to switch over to the expert mode. And this opens up a whole new window of possibilities when it comes to your print settings. On the left-hand side, you can select some presets, and that will pre-populate a lot of the values on the right-hand side, so all these tabs that I'm flipping through right now. And that's kind of interesting because it gives you a nice baseline to start with for certain materials for this particular printer. And so in this case, I started off with a PETG profile, and I used the baseline settings to set up my first print, which you see here. And once you've sliced the print on the print bed, you can now, just like with many other slicers, go through and analyze the upcoming print. So you can do things like pull back the layers and view single layers at a time, look at your infill settings, see if that's adequate. You can see the different print moves, travel moves, top layers, bottom layers, perimeter layers, etc. And so this is a very powerful analysis tool before actually committing to printing something, and it really helps you also troubleshoot if you're having problems with your prints in the future. You can even go so far as animating your print here, and as you can see the nozzle moving around. Now in this case, I'm just going to load it up on the USB drive. I'm going to load it into the printer, and it's pretty much just a matter of clicking go. The printer will obviously heat up just like any other printer out there, and it will start printing. Now the only drawback to having the optional dome and door is trying to get crystal clear camera shots through them. So I'm going to do my best here and work with what I've got. But basically the print is going along just great, and you can see on the very 2 front objects on the first layers a little bit of lifting on those first layers, so they're starting to peel up just a little bit. I might have to go back and revisit the bed leveling, as PETG is very picky when it comes to the first layer offset. And so the prints came off the print bed really easily with just a regular scraper once the print bed cooled down. And taking a look at the prints, it's exactly what you would expect from a very high caliber 3D printer. For these parts, I'm using a 0.25mm layer height, And at this resolution, the layer lines are still barely visible, and the corners are sharp, and the parts are solid. So everything went great for this first run of parts. However, I did run into some issues on subsequent prints, and they were the exact same parts, so I had to go back to the drawing board when it came to the slicer settings and try and resolve my issues. And so the biggest issue that I was having was the nozzle jamming. So I tried playing with the heat settings to prevent buildup on the nozzle from clogging the extruder, but the trick was just to turn the fans off. The cooling fans on this machine are very, very effective, and they were so effective that they were cooling the deposits left on the nozzle and causing a blockage right at the nozzle tip. So then I tried raising the nozzle temperature, but that actually had ill effect. It led to more stringing, and the heat worked its way up into the heat break, further softening the PETG, which is kind of already a soft material to start with, and then it caused swelling above the feed tube. And so I moved up to a 0.3 millimeter layer height, which increases the volumetric flow through the print head. And what that does too is it leads to less dwell time in the nozzle for the material, and that prevents the heat from creeping up through the heat break and softening the material at the top. Now, I did still have the stringing and oozing issue, which you can see I dealt with just by sort of babysitting these prints a little bit, and that required me to occasionally pause the print and use some tweezers to pick off that oozing and sticking material on the nozzle. But in the end, I got great results. And so PETG can be a little bit tricky, as I had mentioned at the beginning, but I think I mastered it with this printer here, and I was really, really happy with how the prints turned out. It did take a little bit of extra work, but again, this is not at the fault of the printer. This is just something that is inherent to this particular material, which is the whole reason why I tried to print with it in the first place. It's a great challenge for this machine. It's also worth mentioning I had zero bed adhesion issues with that Kapton tape bed that came straight from CraftBot. Next, I decided to load up some matte PLA filament. This is a D3D brand matte PLA, and if you guys are interested in this type of filament, Digit Makers also carries this filament. This is their own in-house brand. I did a specific video on this filament previously, so I'll link to that up in the top right-hand corner of the screen. But I randomly loaded this material in just to try out some PLA and see how it turns out, and I was really impressed with how flawlessly the details come out in that spiral geometry design. You can really see how crisp those corners are again. There's no over extrusion, and the print profile for PLA is spot on. And so this brings me to ABS. Now, I gave up on ABS a long time ago, about probably 2014 or 2015 when I first started 3D printing. Now, the reason I gave up on it was the printer that I had started with was an open frame printer, and as everybody probably knows by now, ABS does not like open frame printers. If you just so much as look at ABS the wrong way, it typically likes to shrink, curl up, and lift off the print bed. And so I didn't even have ABS material at my disposal anymore. Digit Makers was kind enough to give me some, and they gave me this awesome looking fluorescent yellow ABS, which I loaded up into the CraftBot Plus Pro. I used the generic ABS slicer settings in the Craftware software, and to my surprise, these prints turned out perfect right from the start. I didn't have to change anything. The print bed heats up to 110 degrees Celsius reasonably quickly, and it does an amazing job at adhering the ABS to the Kapton tape. I did not have to use any sort of additional adhesion promoter, and as a side effect of having a very hot print bed is that it passively warms the build chamber. Now, it's not warm enough to keep the entire part at its glass transition temperature such that it's going to shrink at the end uniformly across the entire part, but it is warm enough to assist in that adhesion promotion. As well as this is where the door and the dome really shine because it keeps cold drafts from getting into that printer. The print that you're looking at right now was about 9 hours in total print time, and this thing turned out great. Again, no lifting, no curling of any of the corners, which I thought was very impressive for this material over that length of print time. What you're looking at here is a thicker bicycle pedal for my daughter's little tricycle, which she cannot yet reach those pedals. So I designed something for her that's a little bit thicker so she can reach them. But the important thing here is the support material that I was forced to use for this design. Now, I generated the support material in the Craftware slicer software, and it was a really amazing process because it's one of the few slicing softwares that you can use selective support. So you're able to select the areas of which you want to support your print, and you can modify them in terms of deleting those little support structures or leaving them in, adding more, increasing the density, and that sort of thing. So it's a true selective support system, which is great because it gives you the flexibility of putting that support material where it needs to be and not wasting it in other areas. After that, I proceeded to print the remainder of the roll of ABS material, and I can say that for the entire roll, I maybe only had 1 or 2 prints where I ended up with some of the corners or edges lifting just a little bit, but it was a pretty much flawless ABS printing experience, which I think speaks volumes about this printer and its capabilities. At the time of making this video, I'm making my way through another roll of PLA, and I'm really trying to maximize my print time and experience with this printer so I can give you the most factual and honest opinion of it. Now, I've had this printer for about 3 months total. I don't own it. As I mentioned at the beginning of the video, it was lent to me from Digit Makers, and they were kind enough to do that so I could make this video and give you guys an honest review of it. And since my time with this printer is almost up, I'm really sad to see it go. It's been an absolute workhorse for me, and it's caused me 0 issues whatsoever. Mechanically, it is probably going to be one of the most sound printers that you'll ever purchase or use, and it definitely lives up to its nickname, the Tank. I think it's been very thoughtfully designed, and as you spend more time with the printer, you notice things even like this little window where you can see how much filament you have left on your roll, so you don't have to look behind the printer. Everything from the build quality to the component selection, things like the linear guides and bearings are just absolutely huge for this size of a printer. You can tell this printer was built to last, and a lot of the components are overkill, which is great for longevity and having something like a workhorse of a printer in your arsenal of 3D printers. Looking more closely inside the printer, you can see all of the bearing holders and guides are all metal. There's nothing here that is made of 3D printed plastic where maybe other manufacturers are using 3D printed parts on their production printers. And wherever you look, you can tell that no shortcuts were taken. Even on the print bed, the very short run of cables that go from the control board behind the back panel to the print bed, it's managed with a cable chain. Another great little feature that I like is the ability to change print settings on the fly. So while the print is taking place, you can use the user interface on the front of the machine to change things like the nozzle temperature or the bed temperature, as well as changing things like the flow percentage or the speed of the print, all while your print is taking place. In terms of dimensional accuracy, the prints come out excellent, and here's an example of 2 ABS prints that are supposed to be size on size, and so they are a light press fit to fit together. Theoretically, size on size parts shouldn't fit together at all, but of course there's some tolerances associated with 3D printing, and in this particular case, these 2 parts, like I said, were able to fit together with a very light press fit, which would indicate that we're into the few thousandths of an inch in terms of accuracy. So this brings me to the pros and cons list for this printer, and we'll start off with the pros. So first, as I've already sort of touched on, it is of high quality construction. Everything is built to last. It's also reliable, and it just works. Once you hit print, you can pretty much just walk away and you don't have to worry about too much. All the presets that come with the slicer software also just work. They're dialed in for this printer, and it works great. Very little monkeying around and troubleshooting. I've leveled the bed once, never had to return and level it again. It carries a 5-year warranty, and the slicer software is fantastic. It's not just some reskin version of Cura or something else. It was developed in-house by CraftBot, and so it works really, really well with this printer. Onto the cons list, this was a lot more difficult for me to figure out because in general, I was just so happy with this printer. But to be a little bit picky, there's no tension adjustment on the extruder gear, so it sits at 1 tension level. And so if you're trying to print with flexible material, that could be a problem. I'm not sure. I didn't try it, so I can't say for certain. There's also limited access to the build chamber. So especially with the dome on top, that restricts access from the top. You can't get your hands in there. Obviously, you can still open the door in the front, but the side panels are not removable. So if you're trying to, just maneuver your hands around in there, you can only really access it from the front. The cost of this printer is relatively high, but again, you're getting a great machine. Other than that, I could not think of anything else. And so who would I recommend this printer for? I think there's really 3 major use cases for this printer where it would really shine. One of them is the educational environment. The second one is a professional environment. And the third is somebody who has a print service. And the common theme between all three of these is you need a printer that is a workhorse. And I've mentioned it several times now in this video, but the quality of this machine is excellent and it's just built to last. So this is something that you could run 24 hours a day and really abuse and not have to worry about it breaking down, especially if you have something, like I said, like a print service where downtime is gonna cost you money. I really foresee this thing lasting for longer than the 5-year warranty period that CraftBot advertises on their website. So I really think over 5 years, you're not gonna have any mechanical issues, at least with this printer whatsoever. So that's not to say this printer isn't suitable for a beginner, because it is very easy to get started with and set up. Now, typically for beginners, they just wanna sort of get their feet wet in the 3D printing world, and they wanna start off with a cheap printer, which is totally understandable. But what ends up happening over time is you want to end up upgrading that printer, and you end up spending more time and effort upgrading it than probably what it's worth in the end. It's part of the experience, which is of course fun, but if you have the means to start off with something of higher quality, I would definitely look into something like this, because the other big upside to starting with something like this is the safety and certification. So this is one of the very few printers that I felt comfortable with leaving running unattended, whether it's overnight or if I leave the house. The printer is fully certified in the country that I'm in, and so I felt comfortable with it as opposed to, let's say, a cheap Chinese machine where the certification that it carries is likely falsified or fake, and they've been known to catch fire. So again, the confidence in this machine is very high, and I would highly recommend this if you are a beginner with the means to purchase something like this. And so that pretty much wraps up this video, as well as my experience with this amazing 3D printer from CraftBot. A big thank you goes out again to digitmakers.ca. Please go check out their website where you'll find this 3D printer as well as many others, plus filament, upgrade parts, accessories, etc. And they even have their own professional 3D printing service that you can use as well if you're looking to get something professionally 3D printed. Thanks again for watching, guys, and if you like this video, please consider subscribing.